I'm going to use a dental block because when I do lips are obviously a very sensitive part of the face. Spend a little bit of time considering about how you're going to make it comfortable. So the filler itself has got anaesthetic mixed in with it, so that numbs it up to an extent. But then I also am doing a dental block to numb the whole area. So a little bit like when you go to the dentist, except the stuff that we use doesn't last usually as long as that. So when you go to the dentist, it might last for a few hours. This typically is like half an hour to an hour. The advantage of that then is that it's much, much more comfortable. The cannula, which you'll see me using in a minute, we use a combination of needle and cannula for Emily. The cannula, interestingly, for other parts of the face, tends to be more comfortable than a needle, but when you're using a cannula in the lips, it can actually be more sensitive. But there are other advantages that I like to using a cannula. For example, there you don't get as much swelling. You'll still get some swelling, you always get swelling with lips. You're far less likely to get bruising. And it can be a little bit safer as well. So the cannula is great, but because it's sensitive, I like to numb it up first. So that's what we're going to do first, Emily. Yeah. So it's a lidocaine dental block. Right, so when I do the dental block, I'm going to wiggle the lips that go in. Now, the reason that we do this, Emily, is not the same as that we've got the shakes. It's because it fools the body into thinking about the wiggle, and you don't notice the needle going in. So it just makes it much more comfortable. So nice wiggle. Just inject very gently. The other thing about an anaesthetic is it gives the sensation of making the lips feel enormous when you haven't actually changed the shape at all. But that's just the effect of it. How are you doing? Yeah. Didn't even feel. Just each corner of the mouth, top and bottom. This will numb it up really effectively for about half an hour to an hour, which is just perfect for what we want. Right, so what we're doing for Emily is we're using a combination of fillers. Just put a little bit of cream on, just a little very superficial line that Emily doesn't like that I'm going to treat for at the same time. So we're using the Bottero range of fillers with hyaluronic acid. We're using their latest lip products, which are a combination of shape and contour. The advantage of that is that we've got a thin one and a thick one, so that you can really tailor it to the shape of the lip and do different things because you've got a thick one and a thin one. So we're going to use the thin one for contouring around the corners and along the edge of the lip. And we use a needle for that, and it goes in very, very superficially. And that gives a nice sharp edge. Now Emily doesn't need a lot there because she's not needing sort of definition in the borders, but I am still going to do a little bit, and then I'm going to use that same filler to do this little line down there. Then we're going to use a cannula, and say that I like the cannula in the lips, but that's for the body of the lip. So the body of the lip is like the red bit, and that means that I'm going to do a little tiny nip with the needle in the corner, at both corners, and then you can see the cannula going into the body, and that's the thick filler. So the thick one gives you body and volume, and the thin one is great for, though Emily doesn't have any, if you've got somebody that's got lipstick bleed and they've got these little tiny lines, you need to address the border of the lip, maybe the actual lines themselves, and usually you need to do a little bit in the body. But for using the thin filler for little fine lines, it works a treat. But this is the cannula. Just going to attach that onto the syringe, which you would normally put a needle there, so I'm putting the cannula on. It's quite long. The cannula looks like a needle, but it's actually very soft and flexible, and it's not sharp. So it's quite long. They come in different sizes, but this is the size that I like to use, which is 25 gauge. Just going to prime it, which means just bringing the filler up to the tip. And then we also have a needle, and the needle is to make a little entry point. So the cannula isn't sharp, so you wouldn't be able to get a cannula in under the skin unless you made a little nip with the needle first. So that just provides an entry point for the cannula to go in. A little bit of ice just at the corners. Now, if you're going to get any bruising, hopefully you won't, but this is probably the most likely place when you're using a cannula. The needle, of course, is a higher risk of bruising. A little scratch. Cannula in very gently into the body, and I can feel that. slowly putting the filler in. Slowly, because it's nice to see what you're doing, just going very slowly, but it's much more comfortable if you go slowly. The expansion of tissue, so if you put filler in really quickly, it's going to hurt, whatever numbing agent you've used. Emily's doing brilliantly, and it's going in beautifully. A lot of what people feel when you're using a cannula is the pressure, and also the anaesthetic that just feels weird, but it's not exactly painful. So that's your entry point for the filler, for the cannula. Okay, Emily. You will feel odd little bits. It'll just be if it goes near a nerve. It's perfect. It's lovely. And just see the filler going into the body, so it's going right up here, even though your entry point is right down. Just feel this little line now. It's quite nice sometimes when you've got somebody that, you know, they basically want lips doing, but they will say, like Emily did, I've just got this little line. So we don't need to get another filler out for that. We can just do a little bit at the same time by using some of the filler that we would have put in the lips. Now, there's a limit to how much you can do that, because if someone says, I've got a line there and there and there and it's all over, then you're going to end up using most of the filler that was planned for the lips. But a little bit, it just means that it's like killing two birds with one stone. The technique I'm going to use for this, in fact I'm going to come around the other side, is a blanching technique. What that means is that this is a very light watery filler. It's Bolotero Balance, although the half of the lips is called Contour, but it is essentially Balance. Very light watery filler that you put very, very superficial. And when you've got a really small line, which is why it's good for like lipstick bleed, but when you've got a little superficial line, you don't want volume, you don't want to make it look fatter. So it's really useful to have a technique of just addressing it at the surface. So you just want it to go right at the surface. That's it, lovely. I'm asking Emily to smile there so I can see where it is. Smile again and relax. So you're just levying it. It's supposed to be a little bit white as you put it in. You don't need to draw back. Yeah, some people like to aspirate when putting fillers in, which is a good, safe technique to do. But when you're doing the blanching technique, you don't need to aspirate because you're right at the surface level. Aspirating is when you're going into the deeper layers of the skin, and if there are any blood vessels there, you want to make sure that you're not filling the blood vessel with filler and causing a problem. So essentially you go in and you draw back, and if you get a flush of blood, then you know that you're in a vessel. But when this is very, very superficial and it all goes a bit red and bleeding around like that, because it's almost like a scratch that you're doing all over with the filler, but you don't need to do the aspirating. But that should sort that out for you. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of a massage and a clean, and we're all done. So Emily is likely to have swelling for the next day or so. It's lunchtime now, so the swelling's likely to be at its most this evening and tomorrow morning. And then, for most people, by the end of tomorrow it's going to start going down, but everybody's different. So I generally advise people 24-48 hours. And you'll probably still have a little bit of swelling for about a week after, but not at a point where anyone else would notice. People quite often like, if they work Monday to Friday, they'll come on a Friday. They know at the weekend, if they're not doing anything, that if they get any swelling, it doesn't matter, and by Monday they're absolutely fine. I always think if you get bruising, that's easier to hide. You can put some concealer or some lipstick on, but swelling is difficult to hide, so that's usually what I advise people. Lips are the most likely place to swell of the whole face. So. The other thing to bear in mind when you've done a dental block is that it relaxes the muscles, so that can change the shape of the lip. So when somebody sits up and you're showing them how the lip looks, it might be that one side is kind of relaxed a little bit because of the dental blot, and I always warn people about that, so that you may see some slight unevenness, and that's just going to go away after about an hour or so. So are you reasonably comfortable, Emily, for that?
Yeah, absolutely fine, yeah.
So I like to do a picture straight after, and then we put the before and afters together, but the best result's going to be a few days' time, it's probably about a week's time, when everything's kind of settled down, you've gone through the swelling. The swelling's either gone up, they've gone down, and then they've settled.